Okay, guys, today I'll be interviewing Steve Kaufmann, who's a language expert, and he can help us to better understand and reach fluency in our language. How you doing, Steve?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. I read your bio. It's very interesting. You have taught yourself 14 of 16 languages. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know what the date of the bio is, but I probably up to 16, 17 right now.
Good. Wow, that's interesting. Before we get into all this, can you introduce to yourself to the audience, please?
Well, I'm a 72-year-old grandfather. I live here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Most of my career, I was in the lumber business, had my own company. The last 10 years, I've gotten very interested in language learning. I've learned about 8 or so languages in the last 10 years.
Oh wow.
I
Okay,
learned
thank
a
you.
bunch of languages during my professional career as well.
Wait, can you say that again? I didn't hear that last part.
During my working career, initially as a Canadian diplomat and then in the lumber business, I did learn quite a few languages. I learned Chinese, I learned Japanese. I lived in Japan for 9 years, and these were languages that I used for my work. I did a fair amount of business in Europe, Sweden, Germany, France. So I did use my languages quite a bit, but it's in the last 10 years that I've really started focusing in on. It's kind of become my hobby.
Oh, okay, but thank you so much for the video that you created for people and for me too. When do you start learning like language? Why did you want to learn the language? Like I know that you say you travel and you started at your working career.
Well, it's sort of like so much in life. It just happened. I grew up in Montreal, so in an English-speaking part of the city. We had French at school, but I really couldn't speak it. And then I got interested, so I went to France, did my university training in France. And so then I was fluent in French, and then I joined the Canadian government, and they assigned me to Hong Kong to learn Chinese. And after that, I lived in Japan. So it was a lot of circumstances. But I just realized that with the advent of MP3 technology, with the advent of so many resources on the internet, it's become so much easier to learn languages. And of course, I got involved with my son in developing this website, LingQ, LINGQ. And so I just use this. It's so much fun. I get on there and I learn languages. It's just become a bit of a passion here at this stage in my career, let's just say. Yeah, I'll give you an example. We were recently in Greece. So I spent about 5, 6 months, an hour a day learning Greek. So I was there and I was able to communicate with people, and it's just fun. You're able to connect at a different level if you can speak the language.
Really? And we're gonna start with how can you achieve fluency in any language?
Well, I mean, you have to start from the premise that you don't have the language in you. So you have to do a lot of listening and reading. A lot of people think it's a matter of learning how to say a few things, hello, how are you? My name is. That won't get you very far because you don't understand what they're saying back at you. And even to be able to use a few words, to remember them, you actually need to have a broader base of comprehension. So the key to me is a lot of listening and reading done, in a systematic way, which is what we do on our website. I'll give you an example. I was in Vietnam for a week. So we went with my wife, we went to Vietnam and then to Myanmar. So I said, oh yeah, Vietnam, I should learn up some Vietnamese. So I went and bought a few books with tapes and I was listening to stuff and I'm trying to drill even a few phrases into my brain. I was in Vietnam for a week. All I can say in Vietnam is come on, like thank you.
Come on.
Come on. Only because it sounds like come on. In other words, it's very difficult to remember anything in language learning. It's very difficult. If you try to drill, and the more you try and drill a few things into your brain, the less you're actually learning. So the secret is to expose yourself to so much of the language through listening and reading, and then eventually speaking. But initially listening and reading, that you're just inundating your brain with the new language, and the brain will start to sort things out. And you can go and consult a grammar if you want, and that's fine, but you won't remember the rules, you won't remember the tables, you won't remember the explanations, but it kind of helps. Ultimately, the brain has to sort it out on its own, and the brain will do that if you give it enough exposure.
Did you like Vietnam?
Oh yeah, I had a great time. We didn't see very much. I mean, you can't, any country, Vietnam is a lot smaller country than Canada, but you can't go and see everything, right? So we decided to go to Hanoi. We went to Ha Long Bay. We went up to, was it Sapa or something, up in the highlands where the minority people live? Something
Well, I
like
don't know.
yeah.
I was born in America, so I wouldn't know.
Anyway,
So,
I mean, it was a blast, really. It's, you know, it's a very dynamic country. I mean, they want to get ahead. They want to move like other countries in Asia, you know, Japan, Korea, China. They want to get ahead, and they're hardworking and they're friendly. And I mean, there are a few things that are still sometimes, you know, you go a 6-hour bus ride and you stop for a toilet break, and the facilities are pretty grim. But other than that, overall the impression is very positive.
yeah, okay, thank you. What are the process and step of learning any language to be able to understand it, like really understand it? Because I tried a couple of field too, like you know how like I think you understand this too, where you know they try to market to people where you know you try to learn what in 3 months or like I don't know like 30 days or something. You know that, right?
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't work out. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're looking at languages that are very similar, like Spanish, Portuguese, you're looking at a minimum of a year. And of course, the more hours a day you put in, the faster you're going to go. But the average person, like if I have, like right now with Greek, I've been at it for 6-7 months. You know, on Link, my known word count is at about 7,000. I would like to get to about 15 or 20,000. So I know it's a year. It's a year, and that's a language. It's a European language. So it's a little it's more difficult than learning German, but it's not tremendously difficult. If you know, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, whatever, is going to be longer. Like it takes time.
How do you deal with all the learning language and that? How do you like juggle all the language you're learning?
Well, I mean, I try to focus on one. So I'm exposing myself to a lot of listening and reading, a lot of content, and hopefully I'm able to find things of interest, you know, to listen to and read. Like you can only deal with learner content, you know, hello, my name is John, this is my wife Mary. You can only listen to that stuff so much. After a while, it's just too boring. So you have to find something that's interesting, which in my various language studies, I've been able to find, whether it be the history of the country or whatever. No, and you just expose yourself to it and don't get frustrated. Don't be in a hurry. Don't worry about what you can't say. Don't worry about what you forget, because you're going to keep forgetting. And just keep going. That's the process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You have very I would say very open-minded. Can like you say you listen learn one language at a time, but also you talk about in a couple of your video about multiple language. Can you really learn multiple language at a time?
Well, you know, in a way, I tried it. I was with my wife. We were in Israel and then Greece. So I began by saying, well, I'm going to try to learn a little of both. Doesn't work because, first of all, Greek is easier than Hebrew. So in the end, I spend less time. You like to go where there's the least resistance. So the Hebrew was tougher. So I started not spending as much time on the Hebrew. It takes a fair amount of concentration. You don't want the distraction. So what I find you can do is if you have one language that's in fairly good shape, you can continue to spend 15, 20% of your time improving in that language that you already know fairly well, and then you can attack a new language. But if you're talking about 2 new languages, there's so much effort in the initial stages in terms of, you know, getting your brain used to a new way of saying things, that trying to do 2 at the same time is a distraction. However, one thing that is interesting is, and I say this to people who have, say, been trying to learn Spanish or whatever, and feel they aren't getting anywhere. There's no doubt that if you vary, like say you were doing a bit of Spanish and then you did some Chinese, like totally unrelated languages, it is actually quite good for the brain. Because the brain, after a while, if you're studying the same thing, you start getting that sort of diminishing returns. It's kind of no longer new. It's no longer fresh. You start to get bogged down. So to that extent, sometimes varying another language in there can be helpful. But even there, I would recommend going 3 months with one language and 3 months with another. Because it's a very famous German neuroscientist said, you know, the brain requires 2 things, repetition and novelty. So you have to feed novelty to the brain. You can't just give it the same old stuff. Like if you're trying to cram and you've got a list of facts, you know, the first time you read it, a certain amount registers with your brain. Each successive time that you try and cram that list into your brain, you're retaining less. You're better off to go off and read something else and then come back to it. So I guess
that's what I
focus. But if you are getting frustrated and feel you're getting nowhere, then you can introduce another language for a while and then come back to the first one again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I try to tell people. Where just focus for a while, because you know sometimes people don't like the fundamental. They think it's too boring and they already know it. And I said it's not about knowing it. It's about you may intellectually know it, but it's about acting on the knowledge. You know how like people say knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Until you act on that. Yeah.
The only in terms of languages, some of the sort of fundamentals, some of the basic vocabulary, you know, hand, nose, numbers, colors, are actually very difficult. And so the idea that in languages you're going to learn these fundamentals and that's kind of your foundation, then you're going to put a few more fundamentals on top of that, doesn't work that way. It's all over the place. You're learning it all at the same time. The fundamentals, the more advanced stuff, you may remember a relatively, you know, low frequency word that for whatever reason sticks, whereas the most common word, you keep forgetting it. So with languages, it's just exposure.
Yes, and you know, you like to I think I listened to one of your videos. You said I know you always like to read first, and then you said listen, or was it read? That right?
It doesn't matter. I think one thing that's very important in language learning is to do what you feel like doing. So, you know, you have to be motivated. You have to be interested. Now, what you choose to do, and you have to spend time with the language. But whether you spend the time reading or listening or read first and listen afterwards, or listen first and read afterwards, I don't think it matters. And you may be more motivated to do one or the other. And obviously, if I'm in my car, I can't read, but I can listen. If I'm doing the dishes, I can't read, but I can listen. But if I have dedicated time to spend, I can read. So it depends a lot on a lot of circumstances.
Okay. One of my subscribers, he asked, his name, that's called Down Under Deployable. He asked, can you give us tips and tricks for when we interact with people from another country? Meaning he talk about languages, you know, Asian culture, stuff like that. He want to know.
If, as you learn the language, you start to develop a sense of the culture surrounding that language, which is one of the great attractions of learning a language. You are now able to relate to these people in a way that you couldn't when you didn't speak their language, right? So, and so you gradually get a sense of how their culture works. However, and I lived in Japan for 9 years, right? People sometimes are too concerned about, gee, if I do this, I might offend them. Forget it. Just be yourself, is my advice. Obviously, if you're in Japan, you're not going to walk into someone's Japanese room with your muddy shoes on. Okay, that's like obvious. But you're not going to offend them if you behave like an American. They know you're American. If a Japanese person comes to the United States and he's constantly bowing and it doesn't bother you, that's how he is. You don't necessarily expect him to come up and slap you on the back. You know, how you doing? You don't expect that. That's his culture. So I just think people are overly obsessed with trying to be sensitive to, I mean, there's some obvious things, like I said, you know, don't walk in with your muddy shoes. But you got to be yourself. And I think as you get into the language, because when you're learning the language, you're imitating the cultural behavior of this other group because you're starting to speak their language. So you naturally, gradually start to behave like them to some extent. And you start to get a sense, for example, speaking of staying with Japanese, of, you know, when the more polite language is appropriate and when the more casual language is appropriate. And until you have that natural sense, it's very difficult to try to, you know, be on your best behavior. It just inhibits you. The fewer things, just communicate is my advice. Don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you. I would like to know before I ask another, are you into Do you read any other beside like language, like personal development or like self-help books or anything like that? Like read?
I'm not big on self-help books. Sometimes I'll read them in other languages because they're often translations of books written in, say, English. Translations are easier. If you're learning a language, if you read a book in translation, it's going to be easier. But I'm not a big, no, I don't do a lot. I read a lot on history, both in English and in other languages. Sometimes novels, but not a lot of self-help, no.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. When you first learned a language, did you have any fear or doubt?
Essentially, no. And I think that's also important. Before, like when I learned French and I ended up going to France for 3 years, then I realized that I could learn another language to a level of essentially fluency. So until I had done that, I had no sense that I could do that. So I think a majority of people who have never learned another language to fluency, they have doubts that they can ever achieve it. They have trouble visualizing themselves as someone fluent in another language. So that's a major obstacle. That's why the first foreign language is so tough. But once you've done it once, yeah, I can do it once. So the second language I attacked with Chinese. Now, Chinese is a lot more different than French, but I had no doubt that I could do it. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of staying with it, and you get there.
Wow,
And it's
you're
very
so
important
confident.
attitude, because if you're going to climb a mountain and you don't think you can get to the top, you're not likely to get there. So if you have never done it before, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Once you've done it, you'll never doubt yourself again.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask, between all the Asian language, wait, you also speak Japanese too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my one I'm trying to like well, yeah, try to be in fluency in. What's compared to the Chinese and the Japanese, it's it more the Chinese more difficult, right? You try all the have you tried all the character
Yeah.
in the
When
Chinese?
first of all, you can't do all the characters because there's, I don't know how many, 50,000 characters, but I can read about 4,000 characters. So, and because reading is such a big part of my language learning style, certainly I would recommend anyone who wants to learn Chinese learn the characters. Similarly, in Japanese, where they don't use quite as many characters, still, obviously the hiragana, katakana is not very difficult to learn compared to the characters, but I would also put the effort into learning the kanji. I think it helps because then you can read. You can read the newspapers. You can, and it's so good for acquiring vocabulary.
Okay,
Okay.
but Korean
Chinese is more difficult. Not necessarily. Every language has its difficulty. There is a little more grammar in Japanese. There's not so much grammar in Chinese. In Chinese, you almost can't make a mistake. Like no matter what you say, it more or less works. Whereas in Japanese, there's a little more grammar, right? The Chinese has the difficulty of the tones. There's more characters to learn. There's no phonetic script. They're both equally difficult, in my opinion.
Okay. Do for some people who are learning, I remember a lot of people are big on like English where they have grammar. Do we need to care about grammar so much?
I mean, everybody who learns a language would like to speak it accurately, right? I mean, if you learn, it doesn't matter what the language is, you want to speak it as accurately as you can. So we do care about grammar. The question is, at what point do we fuss about the grammar? If you, like with Greek, there's lots of grammar, like subtle grammar, different past tenses and subjunctives and stuff. Until I have had enough exposure to the language and they start explaining rules to me about when you say this and when you say that, it has no meaning for me because I have no point of reference. I have no experience with the language. So I think grammar is something that you can look at initially to get a very rough overview of the language. How much of that registers is questionable. And then you expose yourself to the language, and from time to time you review some issues in grammar and you quickly forget it. And you shouldn't be trying to say, okay, I'm going to nail down this grammar so that when I go to speak, I will get it right. Because if when you speak, you're referring back to grammar rules, that's only going to inhibit you. So to me, it's a process of lots of exposure, every so often reading the grammar, forget it, go back. But having looked at that grammar and it talks about stuff that you have now experienced, then when you see that in your reading or you hear it, oh yeah, that helps you kind of start, that helps to make these structures stick with you. So it's not a matter of learning the grammar up front or anything. It's a matter of, it's something you can regularly refer to.
Okay, thank you. You're really big on languages, but is there any other passion in life that you like to do? Or?
Well, I mean, I like traveling. I think traveling is very uplifting, you know, very stimulating. Obviously, you tear yourself away from the familiar routine with friends and family, and you go traveling. But it's you see parts of the world. It's stimulating. I like reading. I like sports. You know, I play hockey. I play old timers hockey here in Vancouver 3 times a week, which is amazing, with guys that I've been playing hockey with for 20, 30 years, you know. Skiing, tennis, golf, history, food, wine. You know, my wife likes to cook, and we both like to have a glass of wine with dinner. And so every evening is a gourmet experience. So
it seems like you're really enjoying your life. Like you have so much energy. I can tell, like, when you speak, you have so much energy.
Yeah. Well, I also like to stay fit. So I like to do something every day, whether it be go for a run or, you know, even just little, nowadays you can get these routines that you can download on YouTube, you know, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever you want to do, some burpees and some whatever, you know, and you got to do something every day. I think it's eat healthy, exercise, keep the brain working. Don't spend too much time in front of the boob tube.
Do you set any goals? Like,
well,
do you set any goals?
No, I like to, you know, I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoyed when I was in the lumber business. I loved the lumber business. I love the smell of wood being cut in a sawmill. Now I'm into this language project with my son. Going to go to Israel and Greece. I set the goal of learning Hebrew and Greek. I didn't learn Hebrew, but I learned some Greek. Next year, I want to learn Arabic. And I want to sort of, you know, move into that whole Middle Eastern, Central Asian area. So Arabic, maybe Farsi, maybe Turkish, then keep moving over towards Hindi, you know. So, because I've got now, I mean, it's always a dilemma. Like, my Japanese and Chinese are already very fluent, but my Korean is far from fluent. So I could put more effort into improving Korean. But now I say, well, but on the other hand, I know nothing about Arabic. So probably I'm going to go for Arabic, even though I should probably put more effort into my Korean.
Wait, did they actually kill off I heard that they used to have, Korean used to have like a, kind of like the same thing as the Chinese character or something, but they cut it off. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, China had a major influence on both Korea, Japan, and of course Vietnam, right? Their culture. I mean, those countries are very much part of the Chinese world, you know, cultural influence, you know, sphere. In Vietnam, of course, and the issue was always that a writing system where people have to learn to write 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 characters, at least in the olden days, it meant very low levels of literacy. A lot of people weren't going to learn to do that. So in Vietnam, some French fathers introduced the Latin script. In Japan, they have hiragana, katakana, but they kept 50% or whatever Chinese characters. In Korea, up until, you know, 50 years ago, they did the same as the Japanese. So they would use Chinese characters and connect them with phonetic script, which is Hangul. Hangul, which is a writing system developed in, I think, the 15th century or something, 500, 600 years ago. It's uniquely Korean. And they're very proud of this because this is their unique writing system. And as you know, different peoples can get very proud of this. We created this, so it's the best in the world. Like, that's not unique to Koreans. That's everywhere. Like, we're the best. And so at some point, I think they're probably, I haven't followed it, but I'm sure there were two groups. Like, those educators who felt that Chinese characters were a part of Korean culture and we should keep them. And those more nationalistic people who said, no, 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 we want to get rid of those Chinese characters because our Korean writing system is the best. So the nationalists won over, and so now you don't see Chinese characters in the newspapers. But when I was there in 1972 in Korea, I bought a book on Korean history, and it has Chinese characters in it. So, and my guess is with the rising influence of China and the need for China's neighbors, or the advantage for them to be able to read Chinese and communicate in Chinese, I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese characters makes a comeback in Korea. But I know very little. I shouldn't say that. Maybe some, if you have viewers who are Korean, they'll come on and say, no, it's never stuff. But I just think that's going to happen.
Oh, okay. Wait, can you talk about how did it start? All it started with your son and you helping him with his the Q thingy.
LINGQ.
Right.
Well, it started, I mean, actually, you know what? We had an employee. I decided to learn Cantonese about 12 years ago. And so I was listening to local Cantonese radio here in Vancouver. And I heard about a Chinese immigrant who had all his money stolen at the airport. Like, I don't know if you know, but Chinese people tend to travel with a great bag full of money. And the local, whether it be Chinese gangs or whoever, they are aware of this, so that they kind of become prey. This guy had his life savings stolen upon arrival, recent immigrant. So that was mentioned in the Chinese radio. So I contacted the Chinese whatever self-help organization here and said, you know, we'll give this guy a job, because he was an IT guy. If he's good, then he'll stay. If he's not good, at least we helped him out for a few months. In the end, he really wasn't going to work with us, wasn't going to fit. But we realized that even though he had very high scores in TOEFL, you know, these tests of English as a foreign language and stuff, he really couldn't communicate effectively. He didn't really understand. Didn't understand, because it's partly cultural, right? So you've got to, through the language, get a sense of how these people, how, in this case, we Canadians, how we think, how we operate. So we started developing something for him. He eventually went back to China. And we tried to introduce the Canadian government to use our system for immigrants, but they're too bureaucratic. They had no interest. So then we turned it into a multi-language platform. And that's where it all began. And it's just grown.
Yeah, I thank you so much for that. I would like to know that you said you like you like to do a wide
I like to do. Start again.
Lumber or career? Not a lumber or career, you said? Back in
yeah.
Other,
So I was a Canadian diplomat for 7 years. And then I was hired by a Canadian lumber exporting company out of Vancouver because I spoke Japanese and had the contacts in the trade. They asked me to set up their office for them in Tokyo. And I worked there for them. So I was there 4 years with the embassy, and then another 5 years with large Canadian exporting company. And then eventually set up my own company in 1987, involved in exporting to Japan.
Let's see. How was it like to live in Japan for 9 years?
Well, it was a good opportunity professionally. There were many things that we liked in Japan. Overwhelmingly, we have very pleasant memories. But what is most limiting is that there's just so many people. So come the weekend, you can't go anywhere. Like if you go in your car, you're sitting in traffic. If you go somewhere on a train to go somewhere, when you get there, it's full of people. No matter where you go. You want to go to a swimming pool in the summer, it's just, chock-a-block people. So it's a bit, here in Vancouver, you're out in nature right away, right? So that was a little bit sometimes kind of got to you, that there's just so many people wherever you go. That would be the only negative. Other than that, we enjoyed it. It's a nice country and fascinating culture. Traveling, it's nice. There's so many different ways that they're very how would I put it? They're just the way they deal with people, very respectful and stuff. It's quite pleasant.
Oh, okay. Which place do you like to travel the most, or like to?
Listen, in June I was in Ukraine. I loved it. Lviv, Ukraine, fabulous. I really recommend it. Lovely, people were nice. I was working on my Ukrainian. Now we were in Israel and Greece, loved it. Wherever I go, I enjoyed it. Myanmar and Vietnam, loved it. whatever. You're seeing how other people live. You don't judge them. You don't say, it's no good. Their homes are small and dirty, or the traffic in Vietnam is a blast. Have you ever been to Vietnam?
No, I want to though.
I see.
I'm Vietnamese American. It's just that I want to though.
Yeah. So you go there. It's like their intersections are unbelievable. They got traffic. Motorcycles coming this way and coming this way. Nobody stops. Nobody hits it. It just somehow merges and somehow nobody gets hit. Has to be seen. So I mean, just a small example, but wherever you go, like Myanmar, very poor country, and I know they have their problems right now, but very, very poor, but everybody's smiling. Everywhere you go, you see different way of living. I can't say I have a favorite place. I have a bit of a soft spot for France because I studied there for 3 years. Yeah, but wherever, I don't know, Germany, Italy, China, Korea. We were in Seoul for a few days. Very nice.
You seem very happy when you travel, and you really do like to light up. Oh yeah, what does success look like to you?
Success, little things, and things that are genuinely within most people's grasp, reach. Okay, now obviously, if you are sick, so health is pretty important. If you are sick, it's tougher. If you are, very poor, like there's not enough, you're paying, last month's bills with next month's salary, or you're in debt and that preys on you. Those are circumstances. But if you are reasonably comfortable, your income and your expenditures are in balance. You're not buying useless toys, getting yourself in debt. So then what is it? Like, when are you happy? You have a nice meal with your family. You're laughing with your grandchildren. You're enjoying, nice meal that your wife cooked. You go for a run. Your body, you're healthy. You're running. You're breathing the air. Like I enjoy traveling. It costs money to travel. If I couldn't afford to travel, I wouldn't travel. I would be just as happy reading my book. I think success is having things in balance, appreciating what you have. But obviously there are certain minimums, like health, like a minimum standard of living. And hopefully you haven't messed up your, family, friends, whatever, love life, that you haven't got all kinds of stresses and stuff like that,
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is being reasonable with people. I think if you're reasonable with people, then people are reasonable back to you. I think that's right.
Okay. Wait, do you have anyone you look up to, like mentor or any idol or anything? Not idol, but like role model. Yeah, there you go, role model.
There are many people that I respect for different reasons. And I respect, like, I have 2 sons. I respect them, for what they're doing. I respect my wife for what she does. I respect, and every person you can think of, even after a while, you look at your parents and you can see flaws in your parents. But yet there are still things that you respect. I respect, for example, Stephen Krashen, who is a leading expert on language acquisition. I'm trying to think. I remember recently thinking of someone as people who behave, respectfully towards others, who create things, who aren't, small-minded, vindictive. And there's lots of people like that. I can't immediately think of these people, but wherever you come across such people, yeah, you respect them. You respect them. But insofar as to be like them, it doesn't really work that way. I think, in my view, we have a sense of what we want to achieve, and we respect other people who have achieved things that might be different. But if they have, if they have values, that's without getting political. That's the difficulty in looking at someone like the president. There's nothing there to respect. The way he deals with people, everything. So it doesn't matter what he achieves. It doesn't matter how wealthy he is. Like, for example, Obama. I don't agree with a lot of his politics. And I think he was too weak in international relations. I'm not a big fan of sort of identity politics and all of that kind of stuff. However, as a person, as an individual, he was not vindictive. He was not mean to anyone. He had a very difficult role as the first Black president of the United States, and he basically pulled it off not too badly. So I respect him. So I think you can respect people even though you see flaws or you see things that you disagree with, but there has to be something there that's worthy of respect. And not everybody is worthy of respect.
But you gave me a different perspective on how you, because I never heard that before. Wow. But thank you. Where can we find you online?
Well, of course, I have my YouTube channel, Steve. I have a blog called The Linguist on Language. And I have a Twitter account and a Facebook account. Again, Steve.
Okay.
I tweet.
Also, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn or whatever. I don't even, to be honest, I don't understand all of these things like LinkedIn or whatever, what they do. But part of it is, obviously, we're trying to encourage people to find LingQ, our language learning website, because we think it's wonderful. And a lot of people tell us that they're very happy there. So in this modern internet age, you try to attract attention to yourself so that you can direct them off to LingQ, but you can't push it too strongly. So that's part of why I do that. But I'll also tweet on sometimes things political or my travels or language learning. So that's kind of what I do.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm so happy that you took the time out of your day to do this interview. And I enjoyed talking to you. Very amazing.
Good. I enjoyed it.
No, you smile a lot. So, okay, guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed this amazing interview that I did for you guys. And I also actually did it for you. Because when I do the interview, I like to see people smile.
Oh.
And when I try to talk, I want to give them, like you said, respect.
Right.
I try to give that. Right. And thank you so much for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Good luck to you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.